G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of The Hungry Hunter. Today we're in the field cooking on the coals, and we're going to be whipping up a honey mustard pork tomahawk as our main, and that's going to be accompanied by a beautiful creamy scallop potato. So without further ado, we'll get to it.
Food is so much more than just what you put in your mouth. It's a connection to both the land and the sea and the animals we hunted to acquire it. This show is dedicated to sharing that lifestyle with you. We'll be sharing simple tips and tricks as well as our favourite recipes for wild game and seafood feasts. Cooking both out in the field and in the comforts of our kitchen at home. Welcome to Hungry Hunter. This season of Hungry Hunter is proudly supported by Dog and Gun Coffee, makers of bloody good coffee, ready for adventure.
Alrighty, so for the first step of this recipe, we're going to be preparing the pork tomahawks and allow them to marinate. So we've just whipped up in this bowl, as you can see, there's some garlic, salt, pepper, a little bit of oil, plenty of honey, and a whole heap of whole grain mustard. Now that's going to all work together to coat this pork and give it a great finish once it's searing on the fire. So I'm just going to slowly add that in and make sure that's spread nice and evenly over these pork tomahawks. Now for those that don't know, these tomahawks that we're referring to are simply both the backstrap, tenderloin, and sections of ribs. As you can see there, they're basically cut into what's called tomahawk, and that just sort of gives you a little bit of bone to cook with, and when you're doing it on something like the fire or in the oven for a little bit, it just gives you a bit more flavour than a normal backstrap, which sort of is very lean. See, those look great. They've got a really good coating of marinade, so what we're going to do is just set them aside, put them back in the fridge for about 45 minutes, and we'll get started on our scallop potatoes. So I'm just going to grab the camp oven, plop that there, and first things first, I'm just going to chuck a big dollop of butter in there to line the pan. Give that a good sort of mix around. And what we're going to do is slowly start sort of putting down our layers for this scallop potato. We've cut these sort of quite thin just so they cook through quite quickly. We want it to be sort of nice and even as it cooks on that campfire. Now we'll just add some onion. Again, sliced thinly, just so it all cooks quite evenly and quickly. Handful of bacon, a little bit of cheese, and then more potatoes. And we're just going to repeat that process. Potatoes, onion, bacon, cheese. Alrighty, so that's all coming together quite nicely. I'm just putting the last layer on now. And then what we're going to do is sprinkle a little bit of bacon on top, just the last little bit that's going to get nice and crunchy. Last layer of onion, and then the good bit, got some cheese, and we've got some stock here, what we'll add. Now this is going to seep through all our layers and get down to the bottom, and then as it cooks it's going to bubble up quite nicely, and that will come back through, and that's what's going to be giving our heat and sort of moisture to cook the potatoes through. To that, I'm just going to add a little bit of fresh thyme, some pepper, good sprinkle of salt, and then lastly we're just going to add in some cream, which again is just going to filter through those layers and add a nice creamy component. You can see it just oozing down through those cracks. Beautiful, and then the last of our cheese, which is going to come up nice and crispy and sort of coat everything and just make it nice and luxurious. If you want sort of like a thicker scallop potato on top, what you can do is add breadcrumbs, and that will sort of just make it a bit thicker and crispy, but in this instance we're pretty happy with that, so we'll get a lid on that, and what we're going to do is just set it aside. We've got a nice bed of coals formed there, and that's going to cook for about 45 minutes depending on how hot or cold your fire is. Alrighty, so it's been about 25 minutes now. We're just going to check this scallop potatoes. That's looking good, it's bubbling away nicely. There's heaps of fats and from the creams and the oil that's sort of emulsifying on top. So I'm just going to put that lid back on. That's probably got about 15 to another 20 minutes of cooking time, which means we'll get started on our pork. I'm just going to put this skillet on the heat, let that start to heat up. We've got a nice bed of coals there, so it shouldn't take too long. And I'm just going to quickly run you guys through this pork and how we're going to cook it today. So this is wild game, and with most of your pork, what you want to do is cook it to 72 degrees in the center. So unlike venison where you're cooking it medium rare, this we're going to make sure it's cooked right through. It's not going to take anything away from the meat or the flavor. It's going to have a great tenderness to it, and with this nice sort of sticky marinade that we've got, it's going to be absolutely beautiful. I'm just going to add some oil and get it ready for our pork. We want to add a fair bit just so it gets nice and sort of coated. We don't want this pork burning. We'll add our pork. I'm just going to add these guys skin side down. Try and take off as much marinade as possible. We'll save that for later. That looks good. We got that crackling already. That oil's nice and hot. We're probably going to look to cook these for about 15 minutes or so about 7.5 minutes on each side, but we're just going to see. It depends how hot your fire is. But we just, as we said, want to make sure it's cooked right through, get to about 72 degrees for an internal temperature, and that's going to be absolutely beautiful. So those pork tomahawks have been on for a couple of minutes now, looking nice and golden brown. The sort of heat's creeping up around the sides, so we're going to give them their first flip. That looks awesome, it smells so good already. Can't wait to dig into that. You've got like those little chunks of ribs there that are going to have sort of meat in between the bone. Those big slabs of just backstrap tenderloin. All in all, it's a great way to sort of do your pork or your venison rather than just sort of removing it and cutting along the spine there and taking that backstrap out. This way you can utilise those ribs in a cool little way. It's great for sort of introducing people to game meat as they sort of see it as if it's like almost like a lamb chop presentation. So it's quite familiar. But either way, this is going to taste absolutely delicious. Alrighty, so that light's beginning to fade now, but everything's looking pretty good. I'm just going to check on this scallop potato. We're about due. That looks awesome. I'm just going to leave the lid off just so we get that last little bit of absorption before we sort of start plating up. In the meantime, I'm just going to add this last little bit of the marinade to the tomahawks. Give them one final sort of little glaze. There's lots of honey, lots of mustard in there. That's going to come up absolutely beautiful. Hopefully be quite nice and sweet. We haven't let it burn or anything like that in the cooking process. And that should finish those tomahawks off quite nicely. Just give them a little coat in that with the oil. Alrighty, so we're just cooking that marinade off. Give it a couple of minutes just to get through that garlic. Really infuse and incorporate. That smells amazing. Some of the fragrances coming off there are beautiful. This scallop potato is virtually done. Everything's cooked. We're just going to let that liquid sort of reduce for a minute or so, and then we'll finish by plating up. But yeah, pretty keen to eat this. We've got a beautiful sunset over in that direction, so it's going to top off an absolutely beautiful afternoon. So I'm just going to begin plating up now. I'm just going to start by trying to get down nice and deep, get right down to the bottom layer. Look at all that cheese and bacon and ooziness. No real pretty way of doing this, unfortunately. We're in the bush, but get all those layers in there. Alrighty, so that's our scallop potatoes done. Just gonna add a little sprig of fresh thyme. We'll set that aside. And now for the star of the show, which I'm pretty excited for, our pork tomahawks. I'm gonna grab that, take it off the heat. And these guys smell absolutely incredible. Look at that, oozy, you've got the marinade all over them, they're nice and caramelized. Just trying to... There you have it. That's camp cooking at its absolute best, cooking on the coals. We've finished off a beautiful afternoon, day in the bush, and that is my honey mustard pork tomahawk and side of scallop potatoes, which is nice and creamy. You've got the bacon in there. This is going to be an absolute camp favourite, easy to do. Total cooking time was probably about 45 minutes to an hour, but I'm going to dig in. My mouth is actually watering. I'm salivating at the moment, so pretty excited to get into this one. Enjoy.